supply is a key factor of what we need to be driving in the market, and I think build to rent will play that role.
Talk me through how construction productivity issues impacted the bottom line.
I think if I look at the performance of the result this year, there were two key elements to the result. Firstly, we've been simplifying the group, and we've done some 2.5 billion of capital recycling over the last 12 months at or above book. We've exited our...
All right, before we jump into all of this, if anyone, I'm actually really curious to know what people's perspectives are on the current Australian housing crisis, how they think productivity is going, if it's something that we need to address. Whatever your thoughts, put them in the comments below. I'm reading all the comments, so it'd be good to start this conversation. It'd be good.
International construction operations, and then we've taken significant cost out. We set ourselves a target of 125, of which we exceeded, we delivered 141. In the investment, development and construction segments, our investment business margins were up and we had solid growth. Our development was up on the back of completion of two key developments here in Sydney. So that saw the returns of both investment and development. Construction was a bit weaker, but that was driven by the first half because we called out, we had a couple of key projects where we had some issues and some losses. We saw our margins in the second half improve back to 4%. And so that's back to our historical highs. We normally average between 3 to 4. So the second half of the year, the construction business really started to get back to its normal target returns. And also we secured some $5 billion worth of new construction work, which is up materially on the previous year by some 50%. And that was across defence, social infrastructure, and data centres are being three big sectors. So we're starting to see a real pivot and growth back into the construction sector for us as Lendlease.
The Productivity Commission says construction productivity has gone backwards for some 50 years. How do you see that reflected in Lendlease's business?
Yeah, if I compare the business across the different states, I would say in the last 12 months across New South Wales, Victoria, we've seen a real improvement in productivity. We're getting back to our 5 days a week, and that's across our projects which we manage in the business. I'd say it's variable across some of the other states, and to me, with this national summit on around productivity, I think it would be useful around how we approach various key conditions around our EBA and agreements going forward. And it's not Lendlease, it's actually our supply chain that gets impacted. And a couple of key suggestions that we've made in particular, for instance.
I think what you touched on there, I'm not too sure if you saw that, but he's talking about a big problem with a lot of the construction side of things is not specifically the workers actually assembling the buildings and that. It's actually also the supply chain as well. The supply chain is very heavily impacted, and we sort of saw that through the COVID period too. It's not, I think sometimes people just think that the materials just appear out of nowhere, but there's a huge line of supply chain influences that can delay projects and things like that too.
In some states, it's a flexible RDO regime. In other states, it's fixed. So what that means, on a flexible regime, we can keep the site open all the time and manage those RDOs over time. Versus if it's a fixed site RDO, we have to close down the whole project. And so things like that impact productivity. I think the government thinking through how we manage...
Yeah, so we're going to touch on this later on too, regarding what he's sort of talking about there as well. What I think is hinting at is that the unions are coming together and saying they're wanting to push for a 4-day work week. Obviously, in some industries it might work, for some industries it can work, but controlling those RDOs is super important. I mean, my previous jobs and stuff like that have had RDOs, and just making sure that everyone doesn't do the RDO on the same day. You can still manage projects and ensure that your customers or other stakeholders are still getting kept in the loop. Because if you just have a full state or company shut down for one day, every single week or fortnight, it can disrupt the productivity of the overall project. So 100%.
Planning and other key conditions. I think at the moment is they're talking about national codes. There's been a lot of changing to building codes. It'd be great, and I hear that Minister O'Neill talked about keeping it now consistent. Let's lock it down so the industry can focus on executing the code at hand, and that will drive productivity. If we constantly have change with those codes, it just makes it complex to follow the rules and execute because it's always changing. So a couple of those key things that are flagged to be changed will make a big difference for the industry.
How disappointed will you be if industrial relations isn't discussed this week?
Look, I think it's important that there's a couple of things that I would love discussed, and that's around the skilling of workforce. In our industry, we do have an aging workforce, and therefore we don't have the same.
I think I'd love to know what like your thoughts are on the skills and workforce side of things, because we do have sort of an age separation where you've got a lot of people in their 40s, 50s plus that are basically starting to outnumber a lot of young workers. And it's kind of like, I know in the aviation industry where I'm from, there's a really big age gap between, like, say, 25 to 30 to 50 to 60. There's a huge age gap there where the skills are just lacking to some degree, and you're moving from an older generation where they're probably more hands-on and have a bit more experience that way, whereas the younger generation is coming in with degrees and things like that. And I think those two worlds do collide quite a lot. Same with like engineers versus like your trades. I think there's always going to be like some degree of separation there, and it's going to butt some heads. But yeah, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this as well, if you think it's an issue, and if how we could solve that.
Same level of skills that we probably had a decade ago. And post-COVID, we had a lot of people leave the industry. So I'd love to see things around apprenticeships. I can hear that some of the states are starting to focus on that. So nationally, it'd be great to really put some effort behind how we train and upskill. And if we can't get the people through, we've got to think about where we do have migration, getting immigrants or skilled labour into our construction industry, because housing's an issue. Affordable housing, when I look at inflation since the pandemic across the construction sector, it has gone up by some 30 or 40%. So it is going to be important to get those right skills, because that will really help deliver and execute the strategy.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point, because the government is trying to incentivize people to do apprenticeships, and I think I feel like there also needs to be a shift in industry where the industry also incentivizes young people to do apprenticeships to build up those trades too, not just heavily rely on government for those apprenticeships. Now, I know there probably is the argument that especially for small business owners, that if they train someone up for, say, a couple, like 2 to 3 years, help them get their certificate and their licenses, and then they end up moving to like a bigger company, and then they just wasted that money. I know for the Defence Force, they do something where if you go to ADFA, which is their sort of training university kind of thing, you get a degree through ADFA. You then have to stay with the Defence Force for basically the same amount of time that you train for. I think you could put something forward there. I think you could even do that with an agreement with like universities. Say like if there's a business like a electrical company that they need electrical engineers to modify drawings and stuff like that, they could potentially do like a scholarship for someone to carry out their engineering degree and pay for it, but then they have to stay with the company for a certain period of time, or until they basically to some degree show that they've paid back what they paid for the degree, and then also some, like you just don't want a one for one. The company probably wants to see you, if you pay 50 grand for a degree, they probably want to make sure that they get 150, 200 grand out of it. Those sort of things. I think there's a lot of good discussions that could come out of that, but that's not up for the government, that's for industry.
Strategies a lot of people in our industry are sort of crying out for. So I think if we can focus on skills, if we can focus on some of the things to do with agreements and codes, I think those things can make a big difference for the industry going forward.
And from a company perspective,
and I'm really interested in terms of migration, because obviously immigration in Australia is becoming a very hot topic. What kind of migrants do we want in Australia? Do we want them to be doing the low-skilled job, which means that they would go into those trades, or do we want the high-skilled jobs, which is more like the type of like SME type of trades, or possibly the engineering side of things? It's a very, very interesting conversation to have. If you got some ideas or how you feel about it, put it in the comments below.
This can do to improve its own productivity, perhaps in the AI space.
I mean, on a couple of fronts, we've been focused firstly on training. We've upticked some of our resources around skilling and apprenticeships, that's one. We have been pushing the business to focus on modular. And so modular construction techniques where things can be done off-site and being assembled on-site is a key component to driving efficiency where we can get repeatability. Across AI, I think it's at its inception, and we're starting to leverage AI in how we manage some of the resources in more of our support functions. And so that's an area that we're trying to drive efficiency. For us, it's getting that productivity to continue to grow as we are focused on growth. So I think AI can be a real good enablement to help the business grow into the future and drive some productivity and efficiency throughout the whole business.
On the government's housing target,
I would like them to sort of be a little bit more specific with AI. Like I know AI is a very, very powerful tool and everyone is talking about it, but I think what kind of scares some people is the fact if they don't understand AI, they kind of have to revert back to like, you know, what they see on TV, or like there is a lot of sort of, you know, AI is stealing people's jobs and that sort of stuff. So like, I think if you kind of want a movement of the population to move towards AI in the workplace, we kind of need to make sure that, you know, people understand what you're talking about.
how big a role do you see build to rent playing in bringing that to fruition?
Well, in markets like the US, build to rent is a key component. I mean, when I look at the housing market, they would have 30 to 40% as build to rent product, and then the rest is for sale product. I think on build to rent here, we're in its infancy, and I think what it will do is help supply. Supply is a key factor of what we need to be driving in the market, and I think build to rent will play that role. We've got some 3 towers currently today, which are in production, so it's about 1,800 apartments that we will have for rent. We are aiming and targeting to have about 10,000 over the coming years as we continue to develop out and roll out that strategy. And we're getting strong capital support from our international capital partners, like our Japanese partners, for instance, and our Canadian partners who understand the sector from their own markets and are very keen to participate. So that supply will just help manage rents and rent growth. By the more supply, it takes just pressure off the amount of stock that's available for rent.
In terms of build to rent, what's key? Is it location? And what is your experience of how the different tiers of...
Yeah, the build to rent, that's, because if the government end up incentivizing build to rent more than, say, normal housing, it's going to... I think people are going to be quite upset with that. The fact that, you're focusing more on these foreign investors and not the everyday Australian. So I think that's a careful line to play with there.
Government are working on this model to enable it to get underway much more quickly.
Well, I think at the federal level, they've introduced some taxes which have helped relieve around withholding taxes and different things. It's made it attractive for foreign capital to come in and invest along our industry fronts here. I think the second thing at the planning level, as governments look to release new projects that may be on government land, by putting in requirements to have a level of affordability, that's ensuring that the industry responds with either affordable housing solutions or new build to rent solutions, and then just speeding up the planning process. And we've seen that across a number of the different states. We had a development here in New South Wales where there is a new planning regime. We put some key worker housing in. It was supposed to be a 12-month approval. It actually came in 7 months. So those things that governments are doing at the state and the federal level are all helping to approve faster. That means we can get those developments into production quicker.
There are plenty of knockers.
Yeah, okay. All right. So it kind of sounds like, so your foreign investors and stuff would basically come in for the initial build and planning and all that, but then obviously everyday Australians can actually just buy them and then until they're ready to be rented out by the sounds of that. I see that working quite well, especially at the state and federal level if they're sort of supporting that too.
When it comes to the government's 2030 housing target, do you think with focus, such as the Roundtable's focus this week, that target can be achieved?
Look, I think there's a target out there and we need to increase housing supply in Australia. With the population growth post the pandemic that ran up to 1 million over that two-year period, we need to increase supply. So I think the government's done the right thing by enabling and putting out a very bold target. It's up to the industry now to respond. I think the focus is on some of the red tape, which I do believe at a state level has been addressed. And it's great to see it's back on the agenda that we're talking about this. Recently, we had a federal...
See, that's, I can align with what he's saying there. And like when you think back to the election on, why did Albanese have such a landslide and how did Labor do so well? I think it's because that supply issue was, addressed quite vividly in in the Labor Party's campaign, whereas the Liberal Party campaign did not even touch on supply. They basically mostly kind of addressed the red tape and stuff like that, and did the standard slandering tactic. So, I think, at a state level and federal level, they're trying to address the red tape. How good they're doing at the moment is up for debate, but the fact that they are taking it to the economic roundtable as well, it shows that there is something trying to be done. So, it kind of looks a little more promising. I know there's still like a huge crisis, but, it kind of sounds like from this guy's points that it's being met. And I do agree that the 2030 target for housing is very bold, but you have to have something. If they don't meet it, they're going to have to say why, and they're probably just going to blame red tape. But it's better to have a big target and having industry trying to catch up to that than having one that is easily achievable, and then because once they achieve it, then they've got that to continue to ride on.
A heritage site for our build-to-rent product at the Queen Victoria Market. That process came in, gave the approval, increased another 500 plus housing units for that site. So we'll deliver 1,100 housing units for rent again in that location. So I think the government's doing all the right things. I just think the market setting, we just need to keep seeing a level of productivity. And to me, we can only do that if we get consistency across all states. The consistency allows businesses to respond in a very structured manner around the investment we can put into the sector. And as a business, that's what we're gearing up to. Build to rent will be a key component, and hopefully that will start to support government in delivering some of the supply we need in Australia for housing.
But is it challenging?
Yeah, so like it's so difficult because you're trying to tackle whether you're doing these build to rent houses that are going to help renters, because those houses are being built in order to rent out to renters, which is really good for property investment. But the thing is that a big topic for debate is whether people should be having as many investment properties. And I think in my previous video, we did discuss there is 1% that owns like 25% of the investment or the property market, which we want to bring in reforms, and we want to bring in we want to reform, and we want to change policies and regulations there to basically disperse that. So do I think that build to rent is a good idea? Yes, because then it does bring more housing rentals into the market, and it also gives other people opportunities to have an investment property. But does it address probably what the actual issue that most Australians have, and that is, am I going to be able to buy my family home that I'm going to live in for the rest of my life? I don't think it quite tackles that.
As a consequence of the other big priorities this government has, such as the renewable transition, which is enormous. There's also now talk of a rollout of data centres, as proposed by Scott Farquhar. Can we do all of these things at once?
I don't think we have a choice. I think the government's going to have to finally balance, as the economy continues to evolve, making sure we stay on the forefront with data centres. We're getting access to the best technology and the fastest technology, because it has a knock-on to productivity. The transition needs to take place, and we need more housing. So it's how we balance those three key areas of focus that are required today, and do that with a very considered plan over the coming decades. It really does require a level of bipartisan support to make sure we can execute that overall strategy. But I think it's important that we're tackling all three things. Otherwise, something else will end up falling behind. And I do think we need to put equal weighting on all those issues and make sure we progress in a smart way as a nation.
Tony Lombardo.
100%. The fact that if housing is, let's just say, and it's probably accurate that housing is probably the biggest issue here in Australia at the moment. We've got our energy rollout, and I guess the data centers and stuff is coming in as well at the moment. So if you think of those two, the renewables and our energy market, and housing crisis being like our two top issues in Australia, I think the government should be able to and will tackle them, both concurrently. If they can't do that, then they definitely shouldn't be in government. So I think it's well within their capability of doing that too, just as he said.
Lombardo, thanks for joining the program.
Thank you very much, Kirsten.
If you got any sort of things that you want to add to that, put in the comments below. If you agree, if you disagree, any sort of thoughts or what you think could be a better option for the build to rent? It kind of sounds like that's the hot topic on this one. Let me know. Hi, if this is your first time to my channel and you are enjoying my videos, please drop a like and subscribe, and it will help my channel grow.